Hey everybody, today we're going to do a second video on this Honda GX390. We're going to do a rebuild on it. So we're going to put it back together today. Here's all the pieces and parts after I disassemble the whole thing. We have 3D printed a few of these guys here, just so for organization sakes with our students and whatnot. So we use this to keep everything organized and whatnot. So we're going to start with assembly and all the pieces and parts. This is after we've checked all the components for any wear or any issues we may have. You'll notice in this video I'm not going to replace gaskets and whatnot. These are engines that we do quite often in our program. So let's get started. So one of the things that I've in the link in the description, I'll have a link to this diagram here, this document here. It's pretty good. It's got all the torque specifications and whatnot you're going to need, and timing setup and whatnot. Also, I have a service manual, which I've posted the link as well for that as well, and in the owner's manual if you need. This is usually after we've done all of the cleaning and whatnot. I do use an assembly lube a lot of times on our engines, only because they sit for quite a while. You can just use oil too. That works just as well. This is what I use here. Just basic engine assembly lube. That way, if it sits for quite a while, it's okay. We'll start off with putting our pistons together, and connecting rods here, and our piston, our rings are here. On our diagram, it does state here the direction the piston and the connector rod must go together, and also our spacing for our rings, and of course the colors and whatnot. Top ring should be chrome, second ring is black, and of course our oil ring on the bottom. We do want about 120 degree spacing between the rings, and the C-clips, just be sure you are keeping an eye on those guys because they tend to want to go for a ride. So first, I think we'll put the piston back on the connecting rod, and then we will put the rings on and install the piston. Our piston pins here, and if I look at my photo, it does show me that I do need my dot on my piston. It's here, and it must line up with this one, the oil hole here, like so. My piston pin goes through. It'll be snug. Like so. Our small clips fit in a groove. Now, I'm not sure if you can see that or not. There's a small groove right inside the piston in here that they snap into, one on each side. That holds our piston pin from moving around on us, and they are quite small. Sometimes it helps to have a small screwdriver or pick, just being careful we don't damage the bore of this guy. Just gonna grab a small pick. So I'm just going to push that into the groove and make sure I hear it click into that groove all the way around. And then I'll do the same on this side. I'll push the piston pin as far as I can in, and then add my small ring here. It is spring loaded, so when I take them apart, I usually put a rag over them so they don't go flying across the shop. And sometimes, of course, see, oops, just like that. Now that I have both of my clips, my C-clips holding my piston pin in, my wrist pin in, and I have my connecting rod in place, I'm going to put the rings on now. So I do have a set of rings. The rings are, I have 2 compression rings, which are these 2. And these 2 basically, my top ring, if I look at my paper here, my top ring is chrome faced and my second ring is black faced. So this is definitely not really chrome faced, but definitely this one's shinier than this one. So this is definitely a black one. So I'm going to place them this way. On these rings, there is a small number on them. And this one here has the letter R. And then this one here has no markings at all. Now there's a bevel on this ring on one side, not the other. And in our diagram, it says we should have the R facing up on this guy. So these are my 2 rings. I'm going to do my oil rings first. And again, oil rings, these 2 don't matter. But this one, you put on first. So I place this on like so. These rings aren't too stiff. I don't need a ring tool on this guy. I need to put these on first, or the corrugated one on first, and then place my other rings on second, only because these rings hold the corrugated one in place. And I just roll it on like so. And the same with this one. I roll in on as well, like so. And that will hold on. That's my oil control rings. Now, I'm just going to make sure I space them out so they're not, the 2 grooves aren't close together. My other 2 rings, same thing. I'll put my black ring on first because it goes in the second groove. And I'm going to roll in all as well. And this one doesn't really matter which way it goes. There's no markings on it and no bevel. So I'm just going to basically place this guy on and roll it on, being careful I don't snap it, like so. And then my top ring, I'll make sure that R is facing up, and I'll roll in on as well, just like so. In our manual here, it does say to space at 120 degrees apart from each other on the map. And here you can see that it asks us to, where to go here? Right here, it's very small lettering. It does say it wants the rings 120, the spacing 120 degrees apart along the piston pin. So that's how we place them in there. So all I'm really going to do is take my rings, and I'll be sure if I place one here, and I'll place the other one approximately 120 degrees apart. So my piston's ready to install. On the crank shaft, I'll place it in first, and then I'll put the piston in after. So my crankshaft main bearing is attached to the shaft. It's a ball bearing, and there's actually one in the other half of the case. So I will place that into the crank, or into the housing, the block. I will have to help it a little bit to get it straight in there. I do not recommend using a steel-faced hammer, but you can definitely use a soft-faced hammer and give it a little help. Otherwise, the piston will not like so. Make sure it spins okay, which it does. I'm going to use engine oil I've used to lubricate the bearings on my piston. Because this is going to sit for a while and won't run, I'm going to use some of the assembly lube just on the journals of the crank and of the connecting rod. So I'm just going to put a little bit on each face, like so. I've lubricated the cylinder walls already with oil, so they're good to go. I'm going to use a ring compressor, to compress the rings on the piston. This is a style I like to use here. If you never used one of these before, it's got little indents on the bottom part. That's going to go against the block, and we got to make sure we have it large enough to not move our rings that we spaced out. And I'll put it about probably 3/4 the way down the skirt of our piston, like so. Oh, there. And then I will just crank this thing up. Like so. Sorry you can't see at the moment here. So basically I've just tightened it up. I want to tighten it to the point where I see as little spaces in here as I can. So I typically hold it here and give it a good turn until I can't turn anymore. I'll even out any of this stuff here, so I'll tap it like so to make it nice and straight. I want to be sure that my piston is tight as it will go. Again, when I install the piston, I got to be sure that I have it in the correct way. And my dot on my piston needs to face down toward where my two push rods are going to come through, right here. So it's got to go this way with the dot facing down, like so. I'm going to watch and make sure I don't hit my crankshaft. So what I'll usually do is I tap down here, make sure that my ring compressor is nice and even and tight, and I'm going to use the back side of a hammer, wooden hammer, rubber hammer. I don't want to hit it with anything metal. I'm going to give it a good tap. I'm going to have my hand in the bottom half of the, just support that connecting rod and make sure it doesn't hit the crankshaft. So if I give it a good hit, it should go nice and smoothly. And if it doesn't go, then we try again, like so. Like so. Okay, very difficult to do without one of those guys. Pistons in. I want to be sure that my connecting rod is now on my crankshaft, which I can see is. I'll do this. Put a bolt into there so you can see it a little better. And I'm right there. Next step, my rod journal cap. I'll just put a little bit of this guy on there again. And this is my oil thrower. So this is the piece that throws the oil. So I want to make sure it is facing down. So it faces this way. And of course on my board over here, I do have all of my nuts and bolts and whatnot in there, all in order. So my two connecting rod bolts are here, and I'll put those guys in place. I do have a spec for that that I need to look at when torquing that guy on. If I look right here, again on this piece of paper, connecting rod bolts, 14 Newton meters, 10 foot-pounds is what I'm running it at. I use a little snap-on torque wrench like so. Works great, 1/4 inch, great for those low numbers like that. I will have to move my piston around to make sure I get this on properly because it's hard to get at from here. So I'm just gonna, whoops, get easy here. Put that back down there. I'm just gonna roll it around like so I can get my hands in there a little better. On the bottom here, on the bottom of the crank, I guess you want to see this, don't you? Not what I'm showing you. On the bottom of the crank, down here, this black unit that's bolted in with a wire coming out, that's my oil sensor. So I know I have oil in the engine. It's wired into my ignition so that if there's something happens, it will shut the coil off so I don't have no more spark, so then I can't cause any damage. It's a little tight, so once I'm here, I'll put my bolts in. One thing I should mention as well is that this governor arm here, you want to have it in before you start assembling. It's hard to get in later, so it's best to put it in sooner. Okay, so now I want to torque these guys up. Again, my torque specification is 14 Newton meters. That's a 10 millimeter bolt. I do have a little electrical ratchet I like to use too, but keep in mind that if you're using this guy, don't let it tighten up, or maybe he won't fit. There we go. There, I won't tighten it. Just run them up. Like so. Now I'll torque it. This guy on here, I'm gonna go with Newton meters, so I'm just gonna change my units. Newton meters. And 14. There we go. Just a great little torque wrench. It tells you if you're over torquing or when you're approaching. It has lights, and it also vibrates as well, so I don't have to actually physically look at it. There, and it does tell me the exact torque, so I know if I've gone over by and by how much. Okay, so there's both of my. So now I probably want to just roll it around and make sure that everything feels good. And my piston's moving in my cylinder, which it is. Our next step. My next step is going to be adding my lifters, crank camshaft, balance shaft, and timing everything. This is my camshaft here. I just have a decompression valve on it for starting, and then a balance shaft This guy has a balance shaft, which also needs to be timed to the engine. My lifters are here, and I need to put them in before. So on this one, I will run a little bit about the assembly lube just on the lobe of each valve, just because. And on the back of the engine, you can see that there is a small hole back here. That's where this fits. I'll run some of that as well on here. To time this thing, I need to take the small dot that's here, and I need to line it up with the dot on the crankshaft. That's how I time my cam. So I will turn my crank around until I find that dot on the gear. Get some oil off of here so I can see it better. And so right here is a dot, and then I have another dot right there. It's kind of in between these two teeth. So I'm going to roll it around because this is where it needs to be, over here. And my piston will be at top dead center. So top dead center is right there, right between where I can still move my crankshaft, but the piston's not moving. That's my top dead center spot. So I'm going to place my camshaft and line up that. Oops. Let's do this first. Put my lifters in. That's important. And then I'm going to place this guy. Is going to meet up right with that dot, and that dot should be together. I'm at one tooth, so I'll bring it back out. Move it a little bit. There we go. Okay, so that's, these two dots are lined up. That is my timing for the camshaft. For my balance shaft, it also has a small dot on it, and it is right here. Oops, on that one right there. Same thing, I'll use some of this stuff, my assembly lube. I'm gonna put it into the case, and it's the same thing. I'll have a small dot that I'll need to make sure I miss that wire down there. It goes like, my dot is right there, so I'm going to roll this a little bit more this way and line up these two dots. Right there. 1 second here. Oh, one tooth out. I'll come back one tooth. There we go. Those two dots are lined up as well. I'll get a close-up of that for you guys here. I can see, oh, hold on here. That I have these two dots here lined up, and then if I roll it back a little bit, I'll have my two dots on my cam and my crank. They're not exactly the same, so my dot is right there. If I roll it back that small bit with 90 degrees, I'll come up with that again. If I want to double check and make sure that my timing is bang on, then I just need to rotate my engine around twice, and it should be, my camshaft should line back up. So if I roll it back to where my cam is timed back again a little more. So there I have my two dots are lined up. If I rotate it twice, rotate it once, my cam should be 180 degrees 1 revolution of this should get half a revolution. So it should be 180 degrees. So by the time I should be here, and this do 1 revolution. The gear on this gears, in this gear, this is twice as many teeth as this one. So if I go 1 revolution, so I'll feel here I got top dead center. If I roll all the way 1 full revolution, 360 degrees, back to my top dead center, I'll see that my mark is back here, and I'm 180 degrees away. So that's 2 of my strokes. If I go 1 more revolution, I should come back to the beginning again and have both dots line up. Now I know that I'm timed. Okay, so now I have all 3 in there. My camshaft's in place. My lifters are in there. I've torqued my connecting rod. My balance shaft is timed. I'm ready to put my cover on. My cover has a governor in it. So this is my cover. It has a governor in it, all the bearing. My other main bearing for my this is the bearing for my balance shaft, and this unit also has a gear reduction in this cover as well. On the back side, I'll show you how that works in a minute. This is my governor. This is a little tricky sometimes. You got to make sure that meshes with the gear on your crankshaft. The governor rod right here, when RPM increases, this governor spins, throws out my centrifugal weights, and then moves this rod, which is attached to my throttle. So it doesn't allow any over revving. So on this one, I have the tricky part on this one is only the fact that when I put this in place, it's my bearings. When I'm trying to get my shafts into the bearings properly, sometimes I got to give it a wiggle back and forth to get it to go. But once it goes. If I do need a little help, a soft face hammer, and I can really lightly tap it close to the bearing, and making sure all my dowels are in a good spot. Okay. Once it's in place and you have it all snugged up, gaskets, they do tear. Usually we get a few uses before they tear, so a lot of the gaskets on this thing you can reuse as long as you're careful when you take them apart. Head gaskets, of course, you replace. This one has quite a few bolts on the case. There's 2 sets actually, one that goes on the outer side, one that goes in here. Maybe another piece that goes in the top. That's our gear reduction part of this engine. Bolts on this thing are pretty standard. There's only really 2 different ones. We have some 8 mils and some 6 mil bolts, and that's about all we have. Not a lot of difference in lengths. They're all about the same as far as these bolts go. Again, these ones are all has a torque specification as well, which I will get for you here. Nope. My crankcase bolts are 24 Newton meters. And again, that's on that paper as well. These are all 12 millimeter bolts, bolt heads that is. 8 mil bolts with 12 mil heads. Again, these I'll just snug up. I won't actually torque them. I'll just get them to just snug up. Again, these bolts are all same length, so you don't have to worry about mixing them up. So there's not much torque on these, so I'm just going to use the ratchet here that's it. Just for speed more than anything else. So those bolts are 24 Newton meters. Again, I'm going to use the same torque wrench I used before. I'll just set it to 24 Newton meters. Like so. And I'll torque these guys. There's no real sequence in the manual. They're all snug. I usually jump over to the other side though. So once you have these all torqued, I like to go over them one more time to be sure that I got them all. Oh, see, I missed one. So my front cover's on. I want to make sure now that this thing still turns over okay, feels good. So I'm going to turn over by hand again, make sure it all feels good. I can see the piston moving quite nicely in there. No drag or anything, feels good. I can now either one of two things. I could assemble the cylinder head and put the gear reduction on and my flywheel and whatnot. I think I'll start with cylinder head, which is here. So cylinder head, again, I'm not going to replace the gasket on this guy. I would typically take I clean all this material off of here, and then I would put a new gasket in there. This is a engine that we are using as a aid for our students. The head gasket only goes on one way. This area's got to meet that passage there, so it goes like so. The dowels help hold in place for me. My cylinder head, I need to assemble as well. I have no valves or anything in it currently, so I will show you how to assemble that right now. This is my cylinder head. I can see that I do have a seal on one of the guides and no seal on that one. That is my intake valve. Intake valve has a seal, exhaust valve does not. So when I assemble, I usually use just a rag. I put the rag on my bench so that I can hold my valves up when I go install them. So my two valves here, I have my spring, two springs, and they are the same. I have some adjusters and some retainers that I'm going to need. Just taking them out of my holder here. So I have two retainers and I also have a small rotator. Now the rotator, it looks like so. It's quite tiny, and that goes on my exhaust. It helps keep that exhaust valve rotating. And in that picture, the photo I had showed you earlier, it does go through a lot of those steps in here as well. If you are looking at the service manual, I put in the link down in the description as well. It will take you to all the specifications that you need for measuring and looking for tolerances and whatnot for your engine. I'll send a link to this as well, because it's very handy to have. So when I do my valves, typically what I do is I put my valves in, again, oil, engine oil, just on the stem, just to make sure it's lubricated when we first fire it up. Intake valve is always bigger. Exhaust valve is smaller, and you can see it's got dark, so it's been the exhaust side. I just basically I'm going to put it this way so you guys can see it better. Oh, my valve fell out. Hold on here. So I use my rag to hold my valves up so I don't have to push underneath my spring, whichever valve I happen to be doing first. If I'm doing my exhaust valve, my two retainers are different. This one here holds that small rotator, and this one does not. So if I'm doing the exhaust valve first, I got to be sure I'm using the one with the larger bore there, so I can put my rotator on there. When I go to do my valves, you can see that I do have a bigger slot in the bottom side. Oops, sorry, bottom slide. And I'm going to roll it through there and then roll it to the top. I think you guys can probably see. I'll try like that. So as I push down, I bring it toward me through. So I put the valve as I go through that spot. Hold on here. I need a better rag in there. So I push down. You can do it by hand. It's not too hard. And then you'll roll it back that way, and then it locks itself into place. I take my rotator and I drop it right on top of that guy. My intake valve, the same thing. I do the exact same thing. I push it this way through and then I push it toward center again. That locks my two valves in place. Cylinder head is pretty much together. Next step is to mount it. And to do that, I have my dowels. And these dowels help me support the cylinder head, so it won't slide off on me. My cylinder head only goes one way. Again, if I'm not sure, I flip it over and I can see my two ports here. This is where my push rods run through my cylinder head, and my push rods run through the bottom part of here, so it has to go that way. And again, it will hang nicely like so. My 4 bolts are all exactly the same length. And of course, there's a torque specification as well. And this one goes inside, really close to the valves. This one, it's 14 mil. I'll just use a ratchet to snug this guy up. And again, the torque specification on this one is on that same paper. Again, you can get the torque specifications from the service manual, but I find that paper is pretty good as far as telling me what I need for all those specifications. Snug it, don't tighten it. I'm going to cross it. I'm not going to do one after another. I'm going to crisscross across the cylinder head, and then I'll do the same. The next one, it doesn't matter which way you go. I just snug it just barely tight because I am going to torque these. Now, I can assemble from this point. I can put my connecting rods in, and my rocker arms and my mother valve components, and I can adjust the valves too. I need to adjust the valves on this guy. So I've snugged these up, and my torque spec for my cylinder head bolts are I'm just looking for them here, sorry. 35 Newton meters for my cylinder head bolts. I'll use the same torque wrench. I'm going to go to this click type torque wrench instead. It's 3/8 drive, a little bigger than the other one. The other one's a quarter. The specification, this is 35 Newton meters. I can convert that over to inch pounds. So my 25 foot-pounds, 35 Newton meters. 35 Newton meters is approximately about 325 inch pounds. So I'll set my torque wrench to that. And on these torque wrenches, if you've never seen before, I just turn my dial here and I can adjust it to whatever I want. So about 325-ish. Again, it's a 14 millimeter. And I am also going to crisscross this one when I torque it as well. I gotta hold this a little bit because this engine's gonna want to move on me. If my tick click, I'm gonna go right across to the other corner. And I'll listen for that click again. I'm gonna click, and then it doesn't matter which way I go at this point. I can just choose one. Click, and the last one. And I like to go back and just double check and just make sure I didn't miss one by accident. So you get to click right away. Everything on this engine is aluminum. So for us, the tendency to have a problem when putting things back on of students over tightening is huge. Okay, so next step. My valve train, I can assemble that now. I have my push rods here, and they go down here and they'll sit inside that lifter that's down there. It'll fall into place. I can use a light if I'm not sure they're in the right spot, but they only have much place to go. If I turn the engine over, my push rod should move because the camshaft's turning with. And the next thing I would do, I'd drop my rocker arms on. Rocker arms, typically we pair them, we keep them with, they're the same, there's nothing different about them, but we usually pair them with which side we took them off on. So remember, they sit, the ball end goes onto the push rod, this end onto the valve, and they sit like so. From there, I use my adjusters, which are these guys. They adjust, so I put them in, and I'm just going to put them down so that they are just snug, because I have to set this engine up still. And what I mean by that is I need to roll my engine around so that it is at top dead center between the power or compression and power stroke. That's easier to do with the flywheel on because it has an arrow on it that actually you can see. So I'm going to leave those for the moment and leave them so they're just a little loose. And we're going to roll around to this side over here. This is where my crankshaft is. And this is also where my flywheel sits. And I have a fan, and my recoil assembly will also fit on there as well. My flywheel has a magnet on it. That's for my coil, for my spark. So these are my parts. There's my fan assembly, and this is for the recoil piece where the recoil grabs onto. This is the fan for cooling, and this is my flywheel. And you can see we have a keyway right here that goes in the keyway on the crankshaft. This is an interference fit. You can see on the crankshaft, this has got a taper on it. So as we tighten this flywheel down, it gets tighter onto the crankshaft. So I just slide this in place until it goes. It'll only go one way, and it'll pop through almost all the way. And then it goes on quite easy. My other two components, these do go a certain way. I have little wee dowels on it that fit on the flywheel. And also on here, I have a small dowel that fits on here. So it only goes on one way. If I don't put it on one way, it will crush these poor little dowels, and then it won't work so well. So I just got to kind of set it up so where I find it works best, kind of like so. And then my dowel is there. So I set it up like that. And then I only have one nut that holds the whole assembly together, which is this guy right here. And it also has a torque spec. And usually what I do for this one is because the engine will turn over, and it's really difficult to hold that engine when that's happening. So what I usually do is I put a piece of rope down the cylinder so that it will push on the piston, and the rope's soft enough that it won't damage anything. I'm just going to snug it up. So I'll torque it now because I do not want to forget. And to do that, the rope is just basically, it's more like a bungee cord. And what I use it for, again, is just to fill the space in the cylinder. So it's just like this stuff right here. And all we do is, through the spark plug hole, we make sure our pistons, I have a look down the spark plug hole, I can see where the piston's located. When it's at the bottom, it's pretty close to bottom now. I just feed in this rope. You can use nylon rope or whatever. Feed it in, and it will jam between the piston. So when I go to tighten now, it's going to jam up everything. So now I can actually do my torquing. The torque spec on my nut is I'm looking. The torque specification for that crankshaft nut on the flywheel end is not on that blue and white sheet I showed you, but it's in our manual here. And the torque specification for that flywheel nut is 170 newton meters or 125 foot-pounds. So that one's a little bit of pulling. I'll get a larger torque wrench for that. Again, I'm going to use a click-tight torque wrench again. And it's very similar to the 3/8 one I just showed you. It's this guy right here. And it's just a 1/2 inch drive one. And 125. There, set. Go to the side of here, I think. Biggest part is to hold this thing down if you're by yourself. As you can see that the rope in the cylinder holds it from moving. That way it, there we go. Here I got my click. Now that's on, I can roll back my engine a teeny bit and to get rid of, pull my rope out of there. And I will now probably want to go and make sure that when I spin this thing around, it feels good. There should be no compression because my valves aren't set. I have no spark plug in there, but it should spin nice and smooth without any binding, or you shouldn't hear any. As long as you've lubricated, make sure you lubricate everything well. Our next step would be to set my valves. So setting our valves. This can be a little tedious. If the valves are too tight, then our valves will stay open. If they're too loose, we won't get enough compression. And our engine can run pretty rough. So with valve adjustment, two things need to happen. I need to be in between top dead center. I need to be on top dead center, my piston. And it also needs to be between the compression and the power stroke. To do that, if I look down my cylinder, into the cylinder through my spark plug hole, I can actually watch the piston move up and down. So I know when I'm close to top dead center. How do I know if I am between top dead center, compression, and power? I just make sure that I turn my valves so that they're pretty loose at the moment. So I'm going to crank them down just so that I know they're going to move when I actually turn the engine over. I don't really care at the moment if I have any. I want them tight, but I don't want them loose. So when I turn the engine over now, I should see my valves move. There's my exhaust valve, and then my next one should be my intake valve. And if I go through the 4 strokes again, think about them, I know that when my intake valve opens, my piston's traveling down. I get the bottom dead center. That's my intake stroke. When bottom dead center occurs, then piston's coming back up. This valve should close, which it does. This is my compression stroke right now. Okay, I can look down the hole and find out my top dead center, my piston's at top dead center, and that will be my in between power, compression, and power. If I continue, my piston will go down another half revolution, another stroke, which is my power stroke. And then once I hit the bottom dead center again, then the last stroke should occur, which is going to be my exhaust valve will now open again, and I'll start the whole process over again. Now I should expect my intake valve to open next, and my valve is closing, exhaust valve closes, intake valve opens, and now I have intake stroke, and if I watch down that hole, I will be coming back up to top dead center. I'm just going to take a quick look. There, I see my piston there now. So now I'm in between top dead center. I'm at top dead center between compression and power. If I want to be sure, on the side of my engine over here, I do have a little arrow. That arrow needs to point right into here. That arrow is here. That is top dead center on between power or compression and power right there. Now I can set my valves. These valves. Now setting my valves needs a couple of things. I have a couple of jam nuts, and they're very tiny, and they have a really fine thread on these things, and they're very expensive from Honda. I found this out. So I put these guys on there. That's what's going to hold my adjustment after I do the adjustment. Like so. What I need to do next is I need a feeler gauge. This is my feeler gauge here. And we use these to make my adjustments. Okay, and these all have measurements on them, and I'll show you which one we're going to use and how we're going to use them. This is my favorite ones with the angle because they're easy to get into the valve and make your adjustment. I need that. I'm also going to need 2 wrenches. I'm going to need a 14 mil and a 10. 14 mil is for the actual larger adjusting nut, and the 10 is for my jam nut. There is a torque specification for my jam nut. Again, back to a 1/4 inch drive torque wrench to torque these guys, and that way they won't come loose on you. If you over tighten them, they strip very easy. So I'm going to move my camera angle here so you get a better view. Okay, so here is our 2 valves, one's intake, one's exhaust, and they do have different specifications on them. Again, back on our paper we had before, the intake valve specification is in a couple spots actually. There is actually another piece of paper. I'll show you real quick here. It comes, I'll see if I can find that as well for you guys. Put that in the link below. It just goes through the different types of, you can see here, there's our flywheel or a coil adjustment, and then right here is the actual written instructions on how to do the valve adjustment. So this is what I'm going to use. This is my specifications, and on here it does say right there the valve clearance for the 2 valves. Intake is 0.15 plus or minus 0.02 millimeter, and the exhaust is 0.2 plus or minus 0.02. So what that means is on my feeler gauges, I need to have the gauges with the correct or closest ones. So if I look at what I've got here, I do have one right here, and that one says, that guy right there, focus, is 0.152, which is the closest I can get on this set of gauges, and the other one's 0.2, so I'll use that one for my intake. And then I have another one here that's this one right here, that one is hard to read, it says 0.203. So those are the 2 I will use on this for setting this up. So 0.15 is for my intake. My intake is on the side with the flywheel. It's got the long post for the carburetor. So what I usually do here on these ones is you need to put your feeler gauge in here, and what you're looking for is the movement between the valve and the rocker arm right here. So when you slide that in here, you're going to turn your adjuster down until it doesn't move. You should feel drag here. If you crank it too tight, it pulls too much. You want to roll it back, and if I pulled it up and down this way, I should feel no movement in there. There's movement, I got to roll it down more until I feel no movement. Still feel a bit of movement, and no movement, and a bit of drag when I pull it out. Okay, that's where I want to be for that one. Now I don't want that to move anymore. If that moves, it changes my adjustment. It doesn't take much to throw it out, considering it's 20.15 millimeter. So I feel some drag there. I'll leave that one there. I want to hold the adjuster without moving it. So don't move it. And I want to turn down the lock nut. I want to snug it. So snug that lock nut. Then I'm going to torque it after. Okay. So now I should feel that slight movement in between the valve and the rocker arm. On the other one, my exhaust one, it's 0.2, and my closest one is 0.203. It's still within specs. I do the exact same thing. I place it here. I roll down my adjuster so that I know there's no play there anymore. That feels a little tight still. Feels a bit of play, or I mean, sorry, drag, and still a teeny bit of movement. So go a little more. No movement anymore, but I pull back and forth this way, and a bit of drag. Ideally, I would leave my feeler gauge in there as I tighten it, but with all the cameras and stuff in my way, it's difficult. Don't move my adjuster. Tighten down my jam nut, and just snug it up. And again, then we torque it after. So it's snug. Both are snug now. My jam nut torque specification, again, I need to look in my manual. It's 10 Newton meters. It also says that in that page I showed you earlier. 10 Newton meters is my spec. I'm going to use my quarter drive torque wrench again with a 10 mil socket. If I can find my 10 mil socket. And use it to torque. There it is. And what I'll do on that one, same thing. I'll set my torque wrench to 10 Newton meters. Just give me a second to roll it down here. And I'll still hold that jam nut, or not the jam nut, I'll hold the adjuster nut, and I'll turn the locking nut. Okay. So what I do now, because I don't want this to move, I hold this guy in place, and then I just torque this one until I get my torque. Like so. And then I hold this one, do the exact same thing. All right. So my valves are adjusted. If I want to see how they feel, I can roll this thing around again. I should have no compression, so it'd roll pretty smooth and easy. I can see my valves are moving fine. When I get back to that, in between there's my exhaust stroke, my intake stroke. So I know now that this should be both valves closed between my compression and power. And I should feel a bit of movement on each valve, which I do, I'm happy with that. I'll leave it there. That's how we adjust our valves on this guy. Our next piece would be to assemble the gear reduction side of this unit, this side right here. And for that, I need a few items. I have some gears. So the output on this transmission is quite low, so it reduces the speed of the output shaft. And there's 3 gears that go here. This one here is our primary drive gear. It only goes on one way. I put it that way. If I put it on wrong, it actually won't go all the way on. So it only goes one way. That's the only way it can go. This guy here and this guy here. This one meshes with this one. There's no timing or anything to worry about on these. It just slides in. Nope, sorry, wrong one first. This one guy first. They don't, there's no timing or nothing. That's pretty much how they go together. And then of course we have a cover for that as well. And it has a couple of dowels on it for, it goes right here. That's where the bolt's supposed to go. And it has a big washer, like so. And it holds this gear on. The gear wouldn't fall off, but it might ride out and hit the housing. And it works back on that guy. Primary gear drive. 24 Newton meters. So on that one, I would probably want to put in my bolt again. Make sure I get on. Look how quick we do. There's my rope back in there. Pistons at the bottom, I can feel it. And then once this thing moves, it'll jump up like the other one. 24. There, 24. And as soon as it grabs that rope, there we go. You guys can see the screen up, see that like as it goes up. There we go. 24. Now I can remove my rope again. And put my cover back on. Only took a second. Just to help align everything, and it looks like so. And it does have oil in it, so the gasket needs to be good or it will leak. This is the same thing. I've got dowels. You can see the dowels here, and there's another one right over here, and that's my output shaft now. So I place this. It's got a bearing, a seal, and basically sits like so. And again, I have another 6 bolts that are all the exact same length as the other cover bolts. So it's not, you don't have to worry about getting confused on which ones are which. This also torqued the same as the other bolts. Again, I can use my air ratchet to snug these up real quick, and then I'll torque them. My electric ratchet, sorry, old school. Okay. And again, if I looked at my service manual on this one, I could pick up my bolts, my cover bolts, which is the same as my crankcase cover bolts. And again, they're all 24 Newton meters. And again, I could use my same small 1/4 inch drive torque wrench to do the same thing. I'll set the setting on it. There we go. And now we'll torque that. So once I have my torque wrench all set and ready to go, I can again torque these guys. And I will always skip one just to be sure. Okay, that is our gear reduction side. My next step I would probably put our valve cover on. Keep the dirt out of there. So, valve cover is here, like so. One bolt to the center. Looks like this guy right here. Has a rubber on it for sealing, and I can place that in. Just for now, I will torque it on after, make sure everything works before I do that. So. Next I'll put the carburetor on, the intake system. The carburetor has carburetor. So my carburetor is here. So the carburetor, it has some gaskets and some spacers and whatnot here, which we need to put in. So the order these guys go is this guy's first, and it can only go on one way. You put it backwards, put it the wrong way, it doesn't fit. If it's the wrong gasket, it won't fit over top of these larger pieces on the bolt here. So this only goes one way, and if I screw it up, it just doesn't fit. The next step is this guy here. It can go on backwards. If it doesn't go on backwards, you'll snap off the bottom part. This piece across the top here holds my spark plug wire, and I put my coil on, which I'll show you right away as well, and it goes like so. It's right like so. Okay, and you see you have that groove here that you need to have on this side. And then after that guy, you have this guy, and then that small hole goes to the top as well, just like that. Next, before I put my carburetor completely on, I'm going to put my coil on. The coil has a gap. There's only 2 bolts that fit this guy. There's specification for it as well. This is my coil, and it goes on like so, this way. I want to be sure that my flywheel, my magnet's not near my coil because it'll make the coil stick. I want to roll it around so that's away from that. And then my coil bolts are the only 2 that I have that look like these guys. So you can see that we have, these are slotted for adjustment. So I definitely can do my adjustment. So again, I just set this in place, and then I look up my specification for my coil. My coil specification is on this paper right here, and it shows me my flywheel and my coil, and then my gapping I need. So my gapping for this guy says 0.4 of a millimeter. So I'm going to use a very long set of feeler gauges, similar to the ones that we used for setting the valve clearance, and I'm going to find the one that has 0.4 on it. And a lot of these do have metric and standard. So be sure you have the right numbers, or you'll be way up to lunch. So this one's 0.406. I think that's the one that is. Oh, there's a smaller one here. 0.0. Here's one I'll use. This one instead. 0.43. So basically what we do with this is we're going to tighten up our coil just about this snug. From there, I'm going to put my feeler gauge in there and do my adjustment. So just about snug. I want to move this. So I want to still be able to move it around. So, okay, needs to be movable. I take my gauge. I'm going to run it down through here, all the way through, and underneath my coil, and basically just lay it down across my flywheel right around. Okay, so my feeler gauge, you can see it, is laying right against. Try to get a close up here, like so. So you can see it sitting in between the coil and the flywheel, and that's my gap. So now I push my coil down against the feeler gauge, and I'm going to snug it up. I have to torque it too much, just enough to snug it, like so. Okay, then I'm going to take my feeler gauge and I'm just going to pull it out. Now I have my gap set for my coil, and then I'm going to torque those 2 bolts and my coil set up. If I'm going to, I should probably show you how to run the wires, because we do have some wires here that we have to. I'm going to torque up this bolt here. Well, okay. So my coil wire needs to be on top like so, and it's going to run across through on top of these things when I have this all connected. So that's going to hold my wire in place for me. This guy here, the bottom wire, has to feed up through and behind and through the top of the hinge of that hole, like so. And then if I go over here, you can see that I have a spot where these run through like this, and this just holds the wire in place for me. There's 2 spots, like so. And then of course it goes down to the rest of the wiring, which we'll cover in a bit. So the next thing for my carburetor is I want to set up, this guy goes next, and my actual carburetor goes next. Okay, on the outside here, this is my choke, and this is fuel inlet and throttle for the linkages, and I do have a choke lever that fits in like so. So I'll put this in. I won't tighten anything up yet because I have to do a few other things still. So I set it like so, and I'm just going to leave it. There's one more gasket, this guy right here, and it goes on like so. So that's where I'll leave it for the moment. I also need to set up my governor. And my governor setup is also on this page, which is at the very top here. It tells you how to set the governor up. You need to have your linkages on, and your carburetor pretty much somewhat in place. The linkages for the carburetor and the governor are here. This is the arm and the spring, and it actually goes on this right here, and it runs out. The linkages go off of this, so my linkages from my carburetor, which are here, actually go off of this guy here. So to set this thing up, what we have to do is, so what I want to do for the governor setup is I want to put my linkages on my carburetor. Even though the carburetor's not bolted down yet, I do want to get the arm on and my linkages on. My arm basically goes on like so, and this is my pinch bolt that basically pinches this thing tight. This arm inside the crank housing, it pushes against that governor where those centrifugal little weights are. So as the engine speed increases, it moves this arm and pulls the throttle back. In their manual, it does tell us to loosen the nut on the governor and move the governor's arm fully open throttle. So fully open throttle on this thing is going this way. So what I would do is I'd place my governor arm on, like so, get it in place, leave it loose, take my linkage, this linkage goes on this end, and this one goes on this end. This is why we leave the carburetor loose a little bit, so I can take it off a bit. I gotta drop that, I have to drop down this linkage into the little hole that's right on the carburetor end. I put my spring into that hole there. It's a small spring. So once it's in there, like so, this spring goes onto this side, like so. I push my carburetor back, and I know that this is wide open throttle. So what it wants us to do is to pull my throttle wide open. So it's wide open throttle. Again, for one, I'm not sure. Open this up, and I know that wide open throttle. Look at my butterfly valve and see it's wide open. Pull it toward me, so it's wide open. I'm going to take this guy here and turn it in the same direction. So on our paper, if I read it again, it says rotate the governor shaft arm as far as it will go in the same direction as the governor. So I'm taking this, and I'm basically moving this as far as it will go this way. That's pressing against the gear. Once I'm here, hold it all the way wide open, and this is as far as it will go. I'm going to tighten that nut down and secure it. It's pretty loose right now, so I'm just going to slip it up a bit. Before I completely tighten it, I'll do that once per time. Okay, as far as it will go. Look it up. Make sure it's rubber, didn't it? Okay. It needs to be torqued after. So now I should have this type of I have a couple other springs I'll put in there, but not yet. So that's set up. Okay, our next item here will be our throttle assembly, which bolts up here, like so. And I'll make sure that my coil wire goes through my here, so it's set to go on my plug. I will place this here. I will not put the bolt in there. It also the cover has to go on top of that, so I need that there. And again, I have all these bolts are pretty much the same. And they all do have torque spec. We use the under torque for our springs. This I'll just tighten them up for now. And leave this one out because I do have to put my cover on there yet. There's my throttle assembly. You can adjust this. This has been off anyway, not set properly. So I will fix that now. This ring here has to go over top of this piece. So, and this one here, the more you tighten it, the tighter the throttle gets. So you need to adjust it. You can see that's a little bit. If I go more, it makes it even stiffer, depending on what I need. That feels pretty good. I have 2 more springs here. I have a larger spring like so, and then I also have a smaller spring, which I'll have to grab. This guy here runs from here to here, and then the other spring runs from here to here. So here is the other spring, just a little guy. So one spring goes onto your arm here, the other one comes up onto here. So a linkage, it's not too bad of a stretch. So, and then the smaller one basically goes here on your linkage down to this one here, which is good. Like so. There's all your springs. So our next step would be to put on our front cover. This is our front cover and the kill switch. And again, same bolts. I'm going to be sure that when I put it on, I don't catch anything. My coil wires tucked in nicely, and I have none of these wires showed up anywhere. Same bolts as all the other ones. These small, all the same length. Quick and easy. No electric back. Again, you don't want to over tighten. Not too aluminum. We left that bolt out on the linkage brackets, or the throttle brackets, because we have this guy here that has to go through both. I'll just snug them for now. There's a total of 1, 2, 5, I believe. To the bottom. One there. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then the recoil has 3 bolts in it, and I want to run that going toward the carburetor, and it just slides in like so. And there's multiple bolt holes here, so you can actually move this around anywhere you want, but we usually run it here, and there's only 3 bolts, and they're the exact same as the other bolts. Oops. Open the bottom. Okay, so right now we have our recoil in place, tight, covers in place, tight, linkages are on, internals are all done, valves are set, carburetor is set. A couple last things we have to do now. Our fuel tank still, our intake. So our intake system basically looks like so. It is just a piece of plastic. Again, this is our mounting piece. It goes on like so. Our choke and fuel switch goes through here. We do have a rubber hose over here that goes onto this piece right here, right there, and then our spark plug as well. So I'll put this on. It just goes through like so. Turn my fuel switch. It's a little tight getting the. There we go. Like so. The fuel is off. Choke works. I have 3 things here. A bolt here, 2 nuts, and again, the bolt's a little bit different on this one. It has a washer on it, like so. It goes here. And these are all 10 mil as well. And these ones are different to work. Probably not a big deal. It's all plastic, so I wanted to show that specification. And torque those guys. In this case, it isn't what you say, but if I go further down and I look at the nuts, flange nuts, or bolts, and if I have different metric, I have my metric sizes, and then I also have my values that go with those. So I'm probably thinking I'm going to go like no more than about 10 Newton meters. The other one, and then the last one as well. And that's that. Fuel tank and the rest of my air breather. And I do have my. Now I'm going to put our fuel. My exhaust here, 2 nuts, and my gasket, steel metal gasket. That looks a lot like that guy right there. It goes here, like so, and then my muffler, the whole assembly goes here. I do have 3 bolts. One is for the small shield up in the corner. You can see it right there, and then the 2 nuts that go here, and there, and there, and then a small one that holds the shield for me. I'll just quickly snug these up and torque them. There's that. And then of course I have my small bolt for the shield. Goes right here. better look. There's the two nuts. Oops. One here, and then there's that shield right there. So my muffler is pretty much on. I just need to torque it now. So far this is what the engine looks like. We only have left now my intake, air filter, whatnot, fuel tank left, and then of course our wiring over here, which we'll go through in a second. Okay. The exhaust. It's 24 as well. Which is already set from the last thing we took. One here. Get a better angle there so you can see it. Ooh, 25 on that one. Okay. Exhaust is on. Fuel pump or fuel tank. We'll put on next. And the small bolt here. Fuel tank mounts here, 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 and here. There's 4 bolts there. And our fuel line. This runs underneath all this. That's why because you hold them. There, it's better. Our fuel tank sits on top like so. Fuel line comes this way. If you have fuel in it, you want to pinch that off. Make sure it goes underneath. Bring it around over here. Hold on. I'm not leaking fuel. And basically, you want to make sure your fuel line runs underneath your linkage for your carburetor. This holds onto your fuel line, and of course it snaps in back here. I'll pull that around to the other side just so you can see it better. This tank is empty, I believe. So I can run underneath. You know what, I can pinch it. Oh, got a little bit of fuel in there. Pinch it with my so. And then the clamp is here. That's better. Clamp is here. Snap it into there. So my fuel tank is mounted. 4 bolts, or 2 nuts and 2 bolts, sorry. And again, they are same 14 millimeter. Oh, sorry, not 14, 12 millimeter. Head on these guys. Typically, here. You can see that. You can see that, can you? Way over here. One here. One here. The rat. The other one cannot. Wrench. Okay. Okay. Air intake system, which is over here. This is only one way. Well, it can go two ways, I guess, but it is backwards. This is typically what we're talking about here. These, your breather, this piece goes first, and you have an air breather, cleaner, and then you have your top. It's probably easier to spark plug in now and here. It gets a little bit in the way. These torque, there's a torque for spark plug. It's not listed in our specs, but I know it doesn't list on the other sheet. The spark plug torque actually isn't a torque. It tells you to tighten the spark plug down until it contacts the head, and then go 1/8 to a quarter turn more. That's coming up to your discretion as how far that is. Contacted, so I can't go much more than that because the washer's already squashed. You get a little more movement. I'm going to place that, and then this guy here needs to also go on my breather. So, and this guy here, this part here, can go both ways actually. It can go this way or this way. One way makes it go, it fits, but it won't, your cover will be backwards. Your filter, we have 2 ring nuts. This guy. And then your cover. And then another ring nut for him. So, another ring nut. That guy. And the only other thing we have left is a wiring. So the wiring. For the wiring, this is the out of the manual. I did find it online. It does give us some information of what all the components are and how to wire up this guy. You can wire it wrong, absolutely, and it will spark when it's off. So to wire this thing, you basically follow the diagram. this comes from my coil. This one here. This goes to my oil sensor. This unit right here is called the oil level switch, and then we also have number 6 on our diagram on this thing, which is this is the alert unit, and then the number 8 on the diagram goes down to the switch. So this guy here, it basically goes to here, yellow to yellow, like so. Then we have this guy here. This guy here goes to here, off my switch, and then the last one goes to here. Back to my coil, and then I can bundle them all nicely up in our little holder here. So out of the way, like so. And now our next step will be to put oil in it, fuel, and make sure it runs. The whole unit together, completely done. Looks like so. And as you can see, my tray with all our bolts and stuff in it is now completely empty. And I know I didn't miss anything. Well, that's how I knew I missed that bolt on the primary drive gear, because, well, it was still sitting in its spot. Anyway, that's my video. That's the assembly of the Honda GX390, and I also have a video on disassembly. Have a good day.